I am Vinnie Tortorich. Folks, your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. You may be soft and succulent at the beginning of this process, but hang in there. Before long, you'll be lean and mean, guaranteed. We've had this guy on the Friday show before. As a matter of fact, he was in my first movie, Fat a Documentary, and there was actually more of him in Fat a Documentary 2, the sequel to that first movie. And he's done some wonderful things. And I love whenever I get a chance to talk to this guy. He's got a great website out there. You guys probably know what it's called. It's called dietdoctor.com. And I just wanted to get him back on and have a little chit chat. I'm talking about none other than Dr. Andreas Eenfeldt. Andreas, how are you doing?
Hi, Vinnie. Thank you for having me again. It's great to be on. I'm good.
Yeah. Look, I mean, what you guys are doing over at Diet Doctor, I keep an eye on all of this stuff. People always say to me, who else should I be looking at or following? It's like Diet Doctor, just any of the good stuff that's coming out, you guys are doing. And I say the same thing about Tro Kalayjian and Philip Ovadia and Brett Shear. A lot of you guys are doing some incredible work out there, and you guys should be applauded for it, for kind of getting away from the standard of care, so to speak, and doing what you guys are doing. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I mean, we have a pretty big team now, and we aspire to make low carb and ketogenic diets simple to do for people, provide resources, tools, recipes, meal plans, everything you might need. So I mean, that's the aspiration, to be the simplest and most trustworthy resource for that.
How many people do you guys, you reach probably more than anyone? I know your audience over at Diet Doctor has got to be much bigger than mine. How many people do you guys reach or have within your little thing there?
I mean, at the peak of the keto hype, if you will, we had 10 million visits in a month. Now it's, of course, the hype factor has reduced a bit, so it's down to a few million now per month. But still, that's pretty good. I think we have at least as big of a sort of chunk of the number of people who are searching for it, etc. I mean, 2019 was insane, right? That's when everybody was Googling for keto and ending up on our website. But it's still pretty big. We have more than around 60,000 paying subscribers to our services. So yeah, pretty cool.
I said at the beginning, keto is going to go down the same road as veganism. And boy, was I right. It became another religion. Veganism started off, when I think about it, back in the 80s, friends of mine that were going vegan, they were trying to do the right thing. They were like, hey, we're eating holistic food. We're trying to do the right thing. We just don't believe in eating meat. That's the part I couldn't agree with. But I went, oh, yeah, pretty much. This diet is pretty good, except for this one thing. And then it became this dogma, this doctrine, and then it became religion. And and now you have people yelling and screaming at you on the internet. If you're eating a cow, you're killing something, or it's a rotting corpse, or just on and on and on. We're ruining the ozone layer. Just whatever thing they can invent, they're just pulling out and just going with it, which is just bizarre to me. But in a weird way, can't we say the same thing about keto at this point? And we're two guys who brought keto to the forefront, right? And Nina and Gary and a few others, we can say, look, we were there at the beginning, kind of creating. We didn't even use the word keto. The word keto wasn't, we would say it would be better if you ate along a ketogenic diet. Right. And then the internet picked up on just the first couple of letters of that and went, keto. What say you?
It's pretty interesting how keto took off, I guess, back in 2016, 2017, when it really started to pick up speed. It's an interesting time. I mean, like you, I've been passionately interested in this for a long, long time. So I guess it's 21 years now.
Yeah.
Really into low carb diets, the science and the practical aspects of it. So, I mean, I agree. It's pretty crazy how nutrition debates tend to sort of devolve into some sort of religious struggle between different camps. And ultimately, I think there are positive aspects of all dietary approaches. In a way, anything that takes you away from the standard American diet and ultra processed foods tend to be an improvement, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
therefore, you have all these diet camps where everybody feels better after changing their diet away from ultra processed foods, and therefore they may become convinced that their way is the right way, and then you get into these sort of religious fights. I do think, though, that when it comes to low carb and ketogenic diets, there's quite a lot of scientific research proving the effectiveness of it for losing weight and improving metabolic health and so forth. So comparing different dietary approaches, at least the low carb and ketogenic approach has a decent amount of quality science to support it.
It does, and that's one of the problems. The thing that makes it good is also the thing that makes it bad. People go, well, okay, it works, but who can eat that way? Well, I can, and I know a lot of people that can. Look, back in the 90s, late 90s, when I had my clients in Hollywood, they would send me a rock star that needed to get back on the road, or they would send me an actress that just had a baby and now the movie's coming out and she's got to be on the red carpet. And I became known as the quick weight loss guy. And my big secret back in the 90s was I would just take them off of all carbohydrates. And then these people would say, well, what can I eat? And I was like, well, we got to get some bacon in here. We got to get some real butter. We got to do this. We got to do that. And they would all say to me, and they weren't joking about this, because actors and rock stars, they're type A personalities. They have to get the job done. And they would always, every one of them, it was almost like they all went to the same meeting. They would say, well, I guess I could do this for a while. My heart won't burst that quickly. I'm young enough, or whatever. They really thought that by eating this way, the way that got them lean and mean again, was going to make them die if they continued. As a matter of fact, whenever you watched a sitcom in the 80s or the 90s, they would bring a big steak out to the table and the guy would go, well, I guess, I better get a side of cardiologist to come along with it. It was always like some kind of ha-ha joke about bacon or red meat. So we were living in that time. And the only reason these type A personality celebrities would listen to me is because they had to look a certain way on a certain day. And almost to a person, once that day was over with, they went away from what I was talking about and, moved back towards the middle again. That's just the way it all worked. And when they figured out that, people like myself, we were doing this all the time, because they would ask me, how do you stay ripped like that? I was really ripped back then. And I was like, well, I just don't eat any carbs. You never eat rice? Very rarely. Do you never have wine? No, not really. They couldn't even get behind that 30 years. And we're talking a good 30, 35 years now. No one could even wrap their mind. And they would always go back to, well, Atkins died of a heart attack. And it's like, no, he didn't. He died because he conked his head. He slipped on ice and hit his head. Well, I heard he died of a heart attack. Well, you heard wrong. You heard a lie. But these are the kind of pervasive things that are out there, right? That we're always fighting against. What say you?
Yeah, I think there was some pretty crazy times back in the 90s and even after. I mean, I lived through that as well. I mean, I live in Sweden, but I think it's not that different. I actually remember I had a friend of my brother's who went on an Atkins diet. He had a pretty substantial weight issue, and then he went on an Atkins diet and became really lean and felt great. But I was just, okay, you're gonna eat cream and bacon, obviously gonna get a heart attack. I mean, I was the same way. This is what I used to believe. I studied medicine in the 90s, and I advised people to avoid fat, and so I guess that's just the times I do think that this is a bad way to walk down, because you end up avoiding a lot of real quality foods like meat, eggs. I mean, obviously, you know this, right? Really satiating, high nutrition foods, high protein foods, and you might end up eating a lot of worse foods, more processed, more carbs, more. I mean, you know all this, right? So I think that kind of advice is counterproductive. Avoiding cholesterol, avoiding fat is gonna likely take most people in the wrong direction, and that's what's happened, right? We have had an enormous obesity epidemic now. Does that mean that, going back to what you said about the problems of keto, does it mean we should go all the way the other way? Instead of eating carbohydrates, we should only eat fat? I think that's probably not the right way to do it. What you should really do, I would argue, is eat more higher nutrition foods, higher protein foods, less processed foods, real foods. I mean, there are many ways to be successful. Clearly, low carbon keto is one approach that works well for a lot of people, but there are many approaches you could take.
Well, to that point, one of the things I get all the time online is, well, tell me exactly what to eat. And I always say, I can't tell you exactly what to eat because I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're sitting behind a desk 8 hours a day. I don't know if you're a construction worker who's moving all day long. I don't know if you're a truck driver who's sitting behind a wheel. I don't know who you are. You have different requirements for different people. I personally need more protein than a lot of people. I'm 60. More people. This morning, I spent an hour on the stair machine at the gym, and then put on a dry T-shirt, and then did, squats, lunges, leg press, and deadlifts for another hour. I require some protein, right? I got some muscle that needs to be replenished, right?
But we all do, right?
Right.
I mean, for people who are in their 60s, I think most people would benefit from more protein. I mean, we know that if you eat more protein, you will have more lean mass, you will have more muscle mass, right? Even whether you work out or not.
Right.
Certainly working out is going to amplify that a lot. But even if you don't, you're still going to end up with more muscle mass if you eat a lot of protein versus if you eat very little. And we know that there's a very strong correlation between more lean mass, more muscle mass, and how long you're going to live and how healthy you're going to live, and the risk of just basic things like falling and injuring yourself. That's one of the main reasons why people's lives end up shorter and more miserable, because they fall and injure themselves, and often that may be caused by a low muscle mass, which leads to not enough balance and power. So I think whether people are 40 or 20 or 60, most people will benefit from more protein in this world, because the food environment now is, with a lot of ultra processed foods, it tends to be very low in protein. It tends to be diluted by a lot of added refined carbohydrates and sugar, a lot of added fats. That's what you have in processed foods, because it's cheap, right? Those are cheap ingredients.
And look, I tell people all the time, eat real food, eat one ingredient food. Meat is a one ingredient food, pork, one ingredient, just one ingredient foods will give you. And look, I get it. There are people out there who do the carnivore diet, and they have their own religion. And a lot of those people are doing very well, because on the carnivore diet, you get everything you need. You get all the protein you need, you get all the fat you need, and you get no carbohydrates. Not that carbohydrates are awful for you. I eat vegetables every day, that's got carbohydrates in it, and somehow I still stay in dietary ketosis. Maybe it's because I work out like an animal, but there is a balance. There is a middle ground. And I think that's the part that everyone's missing. People start getting upset when, I have a Facebook group and it's got 30,000 people in it. Some people go, oh, you had too much protein. Gluconeogenesis is going to take over, and that's going to kill you. It's like, no, it's not. If it happens for 1 day or 2 days, but that's why you can't give that prescription of a diet, because that diet changes every day. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, sure. And of course, carnivore diets are pretty popular right now, and it's hard to fail on a carnivore diet from a sort of you tend to eat real foods, one ingredient foods, like you say. It tends to be high in protein, certainly tends to be relatively unprocessed, especially if you go for the unprocessed meats. So yeah, it's hard to fail. Basically, we have analyzed this from our new satiety perspective, and they tend to be very high satiety, especially if you choose leaner meats. Of course, it becomes super high, but even fattier meats, it's pretty high satiety on average. So it works, but I don't think you need to be. Not everybody needs to be on a carnivore diet. It's a very restrictive approach that I think few people are going to do for life, right?
Yeah. Look, I know a few people that have gone 15 and 20 years. My buddy, who, he's my climbing buddy, Don Coddington, he failed miserable with me over and over because he was so addicted to sugar.
Oh yeah, sure.
We're going to talk about sugar addiction in just a minute,
Sure.
right after this break,
That's
because
a
I
good
want to get
topic.
into satiety, and sugar addiction is a big problem. But my buddy Don, he just kept failing at low carb because he could do it for a while and then he would just go back. And then somehow the carnivore diet worked for him. He lost 70, 80, 90 pounds. I don't know how. The guy looks like the athlete he was even when he was heavier. I climbed Mont Blanc with him. He was 75 pounds heavier than he is today. So he was in shape to climb a glacier, right? But he still had that fat on him. Now, with carnivore diet, he did well. He found something that worked for him.
Sure, and I'm not bashing carnivore. I think it can work.
Oh, same here. Yeah, absolutely.
Great for a lot of people. So people do well on it, and they're happy on it, and hopefully they continue to do well and keep able to do it. And yeah, sure, I think it can be very healthy. Could of course discuss the environmental impacts of it, etc. That's a separate topic, but from a health perspective, I think it can be great.
And that whole environmental topic is, oh my God.
Yeah, that's a side topic. I'm a doctor. I'm not an expert on that. I do think though that for people who feel that they want to eat less meat for whatever reason, other reasons besides health, there are ways to do that too. So there are many potential options. You don't have to go carnivore, obviously. But for the people who do, I think it can be very healthy.
Yeah. Right after this break, I want to get into satiety and what you guys are doing about that, because you have some interesting stuff. Folks, Villa Capelli olive oil. This is something both myself and I'm sure Dr. Eenfeldt will agree on. 1,000%. If you could get 100% pure olive oil into your system, that's a good thing. Not all olive oils in the United States is 100% pure. You're able to lie. These companies can say that it's 100% pure olive oil and it can be cut up to 40%. This is not me making this up for an ad. You can go look this up. As they say, go Google that shit and you'll see what I'm talking about. There's a book written called Extra Virginity. They talk about it in that book as part of the Vinnie Book Club. You can go check out the UC Davis olive oil study. They talk about it there. Folks, don't fall in the trap of bad olive oil. Get the good stuff. Villa Capelli, longest running sponsor of this show. When you get to checkout, there's a few ways to save. Number one, shipping olive oil is heavy, so the cost of that can be up there. So if they give you free shipping after $125. So if you put in the Vinnie promo code, that saves you 10%, then you get that 10% off. But if you spend more than $145, you take 10% from that. You're still above $125. Buy a lot of olive oil. The stuff doesn't go bad. Keep it in a cool, dry place, and it'll last forever, or for at least a year and a half. But you're going to run out long before then. Villa Capelli, go get this stuff. Promo code Vinnie, VINNIE, no wimpy Y. And you're welcome. I'll just tell you right now, you're welcome. We're talking to the guy who created dietdoctor.com, Dr. Andreas Eenfeldt, been in my movies. I have great respect for this guy. We were talking off air a little bit. Andreas, about, we're some of the forefathers of the whole keto movement, even though we didn't come up with the word keto. We were just calling it low carb back in the day. Eat more fat, you'll lose more weight, what have you. We were mimicking what Dr. Atkins was doing in the 70s. But now you're worried about people being able to do this long term. You're worried about, because satiety is a big thing. And I always say, look, if you can just eat more fat, you're going to cut off that reason to want to eat more. But some people still have trouble with that. What say you?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to keep learning, right? And there's been a lot of interesting research in the last decade or so that really has changed my mind about a few things. But really, it goes back to some pretty common sense observations, right? There are a lot of people in the world who have been eating a high carb diet and still stayed lean and healthy. Like you could talk about hunter-gatherers that still exist on the planet, certain peoples that don't have access to ultra-processed foods. Some have been investigated extensively, like Kitavans and the Hadza people and so forth. But you also have people like Asian people traditionally, before they had access to processed foods, they tend to eat a very rice-heavy diet. And all these people in the traditional sense, they were free of obesity. They didn't have metabolic problems, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. was virtually non-existent, even though they may have been on a 50% carb diet. So these things are pretty interesting, I think. And we have to try to make sense of that. Like, I'm not bashing low carb or keto. It clearly works. It's been proven in studies, lots of experience. It's great. But there are many ways to reach a good metabolic health and body composition. It doesn't have to be a ketogenic diet. So it's interesting to talk about, what are the real underlying factors that govern this. And there are some other studies from the last few years where they have, for example, investigated. It's one from Stanford by Christopher Gardner that I found really fascinating, where they divide one group into a strict low carb diet and one group into a high carb diet. But they try to make both of them sort of healthy, meaning not a lot of processed foods, not a lot of sugar, but one is low carb, one is high carb. And if you're a low carber, you think, well, obviously the low carb group is going to lose more weight, etc. But that's not what happens. They both lost equally much, like 7 kilos or something. It's pretty good. They both did good. One on low carb, one on high carb. How is that possible? Well, you can't explain it if you're only looking at the carbs, obviously. But it turns out that there are actually many factors that govern how much people tend to eat on a specific diet, and that's what we're trying to approach with this satiety angle. Multiple factors that we can then combine and still make it into a simple, easy to use tool. So, for example, protein percentage tends to be very powerful in how much people eat. We, as humans, animals are the same. We tend to eat until we get a certain amount of protein and nutrition. And if the protein is diluted in the food, which it is in the ultra-processed food environment, then we have to eat more. So like if you dump a lot of sugar and added oils into the food supply, which is what we've done, then we will have to eat more just to get the nutrition we need, right? It's like there's no choice. This is what our brains are going to drive us to do. And it turns out if you go on a low carb diet, you tend to eat higher protein. This is all these studies where low carb works really well, then people also eat more protein. So it's all consistent. But there are more factors like energy density, like fiber, and also like the sort of hedonic, rewarding nature of foods. So certain foods are hard to resist, and this tends to be certain combinations. Like if you have had a big meal at the restaurant and you're really full, what could you still eat more of?
Probably carbs, dessert,
Yeah. So I asked on my Twitter, and the number one answer, there were lots of answers, but the number one answer was ice cream.
Yeah.
I think it's like, okay, get some ice cream. I could eat that. It tends to be combinations of fat and sugar together,
Right.
really drive a lot of overeating. But there are other combinations too. Pretty interesting studies showing that if you add salt to high-fat foods such as nuts, you tend to eat more. Like, think of it, if you eat unsalted nuts, then that can be quite tasty. But if you roast them and salt them, then they're even more tasty, and then you really want to eat much more. And a study is showing that if you add salt to that kind of food, then you will eat 10 to 15% more on average. So it's pretty interesting. So what we try to do is take all these studies and all these factors and bake it together and sort of rank foods from the most satiating to the least satiating, and then we can try to guide people to more satiating foods, like foods that make you less hungry, pretty much. Foods that are more nutritious, higher in protein, and foods that make you spontaneously want to eat less. I think this is something like that. I think it's the future, really.
I don't disagree with that. I read a book years ago called Salt, Sugar, Fat, and it was a guy who used to work for one of the big companies. Can't remember.
Michael Moss. It's a good book, yeah.
And he talked a lot about that, where they spend a lot of time. They actually have the best scientists working for these food companies and not working to come up with ways to cure people, where they're trying to figure out how things can be so delicious and so nummy. He didn't use my words, not his, that when you go back to the store a week later, that's still sparking in your mind. So when you see the Doritos bag again, you go, oh, I got to get that. I have to have more of that, because they've spent so much time working on how your brain lights up from all of this crap food. I want to go back to the beginning of that.
Exactly that. Yeah.
You said at the beginning of what you were just talking about, a study that was done. Was it UC Davis? No, you didn't say. You said Stanford.
Stanford, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you actually know what? Because you mentioned that they weren't serving processed food to either the high carb or the low carb. Do we know what?
Yeah, pretty much low on processed foods. They try to keep it low sugar, low refined starch, etc. So in the high carb group, they eat more unrefined carbohydrate sources, whole grains, etc. Right? Also vegetables, I assume.
But we don't know what they were eating in particular.
Well, we could dive into that study more in detail. I'm not sure exactly how much detail you can see from it, but you can see the macronutrients and the general principles, at least.
Yeah, because that's something I've always argued about on this podcast. And I guess I'm arguing with myself, because when I was growing up, we ate a lot of meat. We had a large garden, big Italian family, and we all worked the garden. It was a 5-acre garden, which most people don't have a 5-acre garden. But when you're a bunch of Italians in the deep South, we had this room to, so every fruit and vegetable you can think of. We had fig trees. I mean, think about it. We had lines of fig trees, and we had tomatoes, and we had root vegetables and turnips and potatoes, and you name it. And it wasn't like we shied away from those foods. So every meal had, breakfast was always, things like, eggs and bacon. But 3 times a week there was also grits but it wasn't a pile of grits. It was grits with the eggs and bacon, right? So that was you're eating some corn there, and there was always a rice with the evening meal, or a potato or something. It wasn't the main dish, it was a side dish, right? My wife still, we eat a lot of meat-based stuff, but like when we make a chili, I eat just the chili. I'll put some cheese on it. I might put some sour cream on it, or creme fraiche. She will bake a potato for herself and eat half of the potato. She'll open it up underneath the chili. And my wife does not have a weight problem whatsoever, right? So there is an amount of carbs. And of course, she's not metabolically broken either. And she's a daily exerciser. But you look at these things, Will she eat those kind of carbs every day? No. Will it happen once a week? Maybe. 3 times a month? Probably. Right. So there is an amount people can have if they're not metabolically broken. I like to always make the distinction. I coach a lot of people who are 3, 4, 5, 600 pounds, and they have fatty liver disease, and they have sleep apnea, and their A1Cs are 11, 12, 13. I always tell those folks, you've punched your card for now. Your dance card has been punched. You can't have those. You can't have potato. You can't have rice. We need to fix you first. Would you agree with that approach, or would you try to do the satiety thing right from the beginning?
Satiety, yeah. I mean, I think you can go either way. I think doing a low carb or sort of no sugar, no starch diet, I think is an evidence-based approach. It works, right? So that's certainly a valid way to do it. I mean, as well as anybody, you've done this with God knows how many people, thousands, I suppose.
Yeah,
if not more. So that works. I think there are other options too. I don't think necessarily you have to avoid all carbohydrates, but certainly minimize refined carbs. And if you do eat a bit more unrefined carbs, you may have to pull other levers too, right? You can go super strict keto, and that's one approach that works. If you add a bit more carbs, then you have to do some other things instead, perhaps, to compensate for that. Make sure that you get enough protein. Make extra sure that you don't combine carbs and fat together in sort of processed foods, etc., that drive overeating. Make sure you get enough fiber, etc. So you could do it in different versions. Like, for example, you could go on a plant-based diet as long as you try to get enough nutrition, enough protein, and stick to unrefined carbohydrate sources. Then, I mean, that can work. Some people get really lean and healthy on a mostly plant-based diet, as long as they get enough vitamin B12 and whatnot. So I think that can work too.
Let me
there are many ways to do it.
Let me push back a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
The problem I have with plant-based in general, let's go back to the protein discussion we were having just a minute ago. I have trouble finding a complete protein, or you're missing. Maybe you're not getting enough leucine, or you're not getting the essential aminos or the branched chain aminos in the quality and quantities you could get from animal-based.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree that the problem, or one key problem with plant-based diets, is that you are at risk of being really low on complete protein, and I think that's the main problem that a lot of people might suffer from. But I think it's possible to compensate. Like beans, lentils, pretty high protein. Soy products, if you eat that, pretty high protein. You can also even add protein supplementation, protein powders that are complete if you feel you need it to get enough.
But then protein. On a plant-based, you're talking,
right?
You're taking whey. You need whey, or you need caseins or something, and that all comes from dairy. And they
you can soy protein, pea protein. I know it's not quite as bioavailable or complete, but you can compensate by eating a little bit more, I would argue. I think there are decent studies showing that, okay, you need a little bit more, but as long as you get enough, you can just compensate by adding some more, basically.
I always try, whenever I'm talking to a vegan, and I do a lot of consults with vegan, and I always tell them from the beginning, I am not going to try to talk you out of it. That's not my job to talk you out.
Yeah.
But I always try to push them towards vegetarian. And I always explain to them, if you go vegetarian, some people can go vegetarian and they'll add chicken eggs to it. Other people, I can get them to go vegetarian and at the very least, get them to use casein or whey or something where I know they're getting enough of the branched chain and the essential amino acids. Even, and by the way, people always say, do you believe in protein powders? And I always say, not really, unless you're a vegetarian or you have cancer and you
if you need it, right? If you need it, right?
Yeah,
it's not ideal. Obviously, it's much better to get your protein from real whole foods.
exactly.
I agree.
Yeah.
But if you're really low and struggle to get enough protein, I think it's better to take some protein powder than to be protein deficient.
Yeah. And, I had a guy, people say, "Well, you're always, poo-pooing these powders." And it's like, well, look, I talk to cancer patients all the time because I was a cancer patient. I know what it's like not to want to eat anything. And I always say to them, get a good whey protein, get a good, casein, get something that's going to have everything you need. At least you're getting something in, and you don't have to take much water to mix those. You can mix them in just a little bit of water and get them down a few times a day for those people. But it becomes a struggle. Can you talk a little bit, when you talk about satiety, can you talk a little bit about the hormones that cause us to be hungry and how that might react with what we eat? And
Yes, I mean that's
we're
a
talking
whole
about ghrelin and leptin and
exactly. I mean that's a
yeah,
whole presentation. I mean that you could go on for hours talking about ghrelin and leptin and so forth. But it's interesting, I think, that we have this new kid on the block, kind of. We have these new drugs that are getting super hyped, right? Wegovy and Ozempic, semaglutide and other similar drugs, which are GLP-1 agonists, they're called, and what they are satiety hormones. So they tell the brain and the body that you're full and you don't want to eat more right now, right?
yeah.
So people take this and they lose like 15% of their body weight, 20% of their body weight, and spectacularly effective from that perspective. Now, I'm a fan of them for the right people, but they're not perfect. Obviously, they are. You need to take them for life.
There's side effects too. Yeah,
I mean, you get nausea and so forth, and I think the big problem is that you need to keep taking it for life. As soon as you stop, you just balloon up again and return towards your earlier weight. And another really interesting thing that's come up lately is that they tend to, it seems, lead to more loss of lean mass than other weight loss approaches. Even if you compare it to weight loss surgery or dietary approaches, it seems you lose more lean mass. Like ideally, when you lose weight, you're still going to lose some lean mass, maybe 25%. But with these drugs, you might lose 45 lean mass. It's not so great, really. So, but anyway, so what I was getting to is, okay, these drugs are super effective. They are satiety hormones, right? What if you can get that effect in a natural way from the food? The satiety effect from the foods that lead to the body releasing this GLP-1 hormone, which is a natural hormone, right? And what you find is that that's what you get with higher protein foods, higher fiber foods, lower energy density foods that take up more space, and less processed foods. That's what you get, right? So you can reverse engineer, in a way, what are the attributes of foods that give you more satiety, or sort of satiety per calorie, or satiety per serving of food, right? And this is what you end up with, these factors. And that's what we try to do then, is take this very complex thing where there are lots and lots of different attributes of the food that influence the satiety effect. We put it through an algorithm that calculate all of it, and then we get a scoring system from 0 to 100 to rank foods from the most to least satiating. And of course, this is never going to be 100% perfect with the knowledge we have today. So it's like a work in progress, but it's going to take people in the right direction. It's going to take people towards more higher protein percentages, lower energy density, more fiber, less hyperpalatable food. So we know it's going in the right direction. Now, exactly how do we weight these factors? Well, we do it based on the available data, based on the available studies, try to match it as well as we possibly can. Can we make it perfect and 100% correct? No. Can we make it 90% correct? Maybe. I mean, I think it's probably already better than anything else I've seen. Because if you take another current approach, if you say you only look at the carbohydrates, well, that's way less exact, because yes, it also takes you in the right direction, but on average, but it misses a lot. Or if let's say you go vegan, on average, it's going to be an improvement probably, but some vegan foods are not great, right? French fries, that's vegan, that's terrible. I mean, there's tons of examples.
Well, like it's the same thing they do with vegan is French fries, and you can say, well, Oreo cookies are vegan.
Yeah.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about, I've talked to a lot of people, and I'll say, why did you stick with the vegan diet so long? And I go, well, for the first few weeks, I felt great. Maybe the first month, I felt great. And then I was losing energy and I was becoming lethargic. And I said, well, why didn't you look at, and I said, well, I just doubled down on veganism, right? I just started drinking more juices. And of course, these juices are full of sugar and everything else. And then you start going down that road, and a sugar drink is going to make you feel good for a few minutes. So you think, well, maybe I should just keep drinking these all day long. And before you know it, they have the straw in the cup at work, and they're constantly keeping that sugar stream going. So, things start off in a good direction. They can go downhill very fast. And I think we see that with people. That's why I always say at the beginning of the show, your good intentions have been stolen. We're just trying to figure out how to get them back for you. People are trying to do the right thing, but we just keep getting, sideswiped by big food.
Yeah,
Right?
very true. And the same is true, I think, for keto diets. You have a lot of processed keto products that are very high fat, lots of artificial sweeteners, very low nutrition, very processed, very, very energy dense, very hyper palatable. Not good at all, I would argue.
Yeah, no. So, and look, I've been working on something right now that I'll be putting out next year, where I'll be explaining all of that, because I feel like I, and maybe you and a few of us are, we're the reason keto became keto, even though we weren't calling it that. Right. So I
guess we were early with,
we
were here way before you, certainly, but I've also been active here for 15, 20 years. So yeah.
Yeah. As the song says, we were country when country wasn't cool. Folks, but I have a product. I don't know if I talked about it. No, I didn't talk about it in this episode. I've do so many episodes back to back. NSNG Foods, for this month in May, we have a 20% discount on the Ultra Fat. Go get it right now, 20% off. Even if you've done the 20% off before, you can do it again. 20% off. Promo code Vinnie, VINNIE, no wimpy Y. You'll get 20% off all the Ultra Fat. Stock up. You're out there hiking more. Look, I know I've been out in my kayaking. I bring 2 or 3 of them. If I go on a 3-hour kayak, I'm bringing a few of those with me. They just stay right in my life jacket. When I'm hiking, I'm getting ready to go do Whitney with Coddington. I have all the Ultra Fat in the world. I own the company. You guys can have some of that for 20% off the month of May. Go right now. Don't wait, because if it turns over to June, you're going to go, oh, come on, Vin, give me the discount. I can't do it. That's wrong. I tell everyone the month of May, you can go get 20% off Ultra Fat right now. Promo code Vinnie. We're talking about 2023. So if you're listening to this podcast in 2026, the code won't work. So 2023, May 2023, you're going to get 20% off over at nsngfoods.com on the Ultra Fat. Get both flavors. You're going to love them both. I came up with these. I invented them. I created them myself. And even Dr. Eenfeldt will tell you it's not a processed junk food. It's real food. It's real nut butter, almond butter. It's real coconut oil. It's real vanilla. And I use my ultra salt in there to give it a little salty flavor, so you get some electrolytes in there. Go check it out, nsngfoods.com. Okay, we're talking to Dr. Andreas Eenfeldt, I find this fascinating. I love that someone like yourself, just like me, we went down the rabbit hole of low carb, and now you're looking for other ways to make it work because, in fact, it doesn't work for everyone. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we know that it works really well for a lot of people, but not for everybody. And there are some common pitfalls. So, for example, I think, well, there are some common things that people struggle with on low carb. You probably heard this a gazillion times. Often people say, if you're not losing weight on low carb, try to eat less dairy, try to eat less nuts.
Right.
It's things that have been said for a long time, which is interesting because these are low carb foods. But if you look at it from a satiety perspective, they're actually pretty low satiety. They're low in nutrition, low in protein, and pretty energy dense. Especially if you look at, I mean, dairy. If you look at things like butter and cream and so forth, then I think those are things that some people may benefit from reducing a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just very interesting to look at it from a satiety perspective and look at it from a protein percentage or energy density perspective. And you can see why these foods that have always been, where experts have always been saying, hey, be a little bit careful with this if you're struggling to lose weight, etc. But there's never been a great explanation for why. But if you look at it from a satiety perspective, then it becomes quite clear that those are the lowest satiety, low carb foods that people tend to eat a lot of. What are the high satiety low carb foods? Well, that's
thank you, because I was getting ready to ask the question, but go on.
Yeah. Well, that you probably could guess right off the bat, but things like meat, fish, eggs, vegetables are very high satiety. It's pretty interesting also to see that unprocessed meats tend to be higher satiety than processed meats. Of course, with processed meats, you often add a lot of other things, more fat, less protein, and a lot of other additives as well. So, yeah, I guess you're not surprised.
No, because I do these consults Monday through Friday. People can call and set up a phone call with me, and the common, I guess you could call it denominator, but just the common theme is, hey, Vin, I know this works. I've lost, fill in the blank, 70 pounds, 100 pounds, 150 pounds, but I still have X amount to lose.
Exactly.
And I've stopped. And the first question I'll ask is, have you started gaining weight? And that most times, more than not, they'll say, I'm not gaining weight, but I'm just not losing weight anymore. I'm just stuck. And they use the word plateau, and that's a word that drives me insane.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, I know it works. I've lost 150 pounds. Yeah, I know it works. And I'll just have them take me through their day. And I always say the same thing. I don't want to know what you ate today. I want in general. I wake up and at the end of it, well, sometimes it's a real screw up. Like, well, I started drinking wine again, and my husband and I drink wine every night or whatever. But in general, if they're not doing those kind of screw ups, it's always the same thing. They're relying on dairy way too much. And as I tell everyone, dairy works for some people, not everyone. That's number one. And if you're asking me to give you a study, there's never been a study. It's just my 30, 40 years in this business where I've seen it work for some and not others. That's number one. Number two, the things that were working before, they need to now cut back on, right? And it's always nuts. It's always effing nuts. And they're eating them morning, noon, and night. The other thing is, they'll do tumblers of coffee, tumbler after tumbler. And I'll say, how much cream? And they'll go, I put cream in every one of them. Okay, now you have cream going all day long. You have nuts coming in twice a day. And then they'll tell me, well, I always have cheese with this, cheese with that. And it never ends. And it's like, do you see the problem? And they can't see that problem on their own. But when you talk to them, then they can see the problem. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to expose them and let them see what the problem is.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think these are exactly the foods that, when we analyze it with our satiety algorithm, those are the lowest satiety common low carb foods that are low satiety. So I think that's like a superpower. You could X-ray your what it is that you're eating, and you can see, okay, these are the problems. Yeah, and now what can I eat instead? So we're building a product for this. I'm really excited about it. I think it could be super useful, really.
I'm looking forward to it. And look, I always say this when I walk on stage, and I say it everywhere. And this is a really extreme example. I'll say, okay, I've seen people at, you're watching a football game, American football, Andreas. We don't do soccer here. Watching an American football game, I've seen people empty a family bag of chips by themselves, right? Before halftime. You see them eating one or two, and before you know, they're stuffing it in their mouth, and they'll sit down here in my man cave, and we'll watch football, and they're just stuffing themselves. And then they're looking for something else. And as I tell everyone, you can eat 16 ounces of chips. That's what comes in a family bag, 1 pound of chips in the United States. You can eat that, and now you're looking for something else to eat. But if you ate a 13 or 14 ounce steak in a steakhouse, and when you took your last bite, if they brought another sizzling steak out, you would tell them you have to bag it up and bring it home. In one case, you're perfectly full and you're sated and everything is fine. In another case, you're looking for something else to eat.
Yeah,
it's just an amazing thing.
Yeah, but it's just what you said from this Salt, Sugar, Fat book or any other book on that topic. I mean, the food industry, it's really a fascinating topic. They have manufactured this obesity epidemic. And why did they do it? Well, there was no ill intent, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's just for, it's just by seeking more profit, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting because they are stuck in this system as we are. You can start becoming angry at the food industry and these evil people. They're causing people to gain weight, but really they need to bring new profit to the shareholders. They are responsible to their boards and their shareholders, right? And if they stop pushing for more profit, they will be fired. That's just how it works, right? Yeah. So they're stuck in this system. And all they need to do all day, every day, is to find ways to increase their profits. And the way to do that is cheaper ingredients that people want to eat more of. And like you said, Dorito chips, that's the ultimate example, right?
Yeah.
Cost nothing, cost pennies to produce. And yet people can't stop eating it. Once you open the bag and start eating it, you'll keep eating until it's over, and then next time you see it in the store, you want to buy another one. Just like it's like you said.
It never ends. And soft drinks are the same way, colas and on and on and on. And we said this in the first movie, the movie you were in, Fat, a Documentary. I said, you can't blame the government. You can't blame big business. They're doing what they do. They're in business to make money. So if you want to sit around and blame them, well, you're going to have a really tough life. Or you could go out and do something about it yourself. You have dominion over you, right? You need to take the power back. You need to be, and look, I spoke to a woman last night. I'll mention her first name, Wendy. And man, Wendy was very angry for a long time because she was well over 300 pounds and she had some other issues and what have you. And she, she goes, I don't want anyone to fat shame me and all this kind of stuff. And she was really angry. And she goes, I'm going to be fat and beautiful. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But you could be fat and beautiful, but you're not going to be healthy, right? And you're going to have a really rough life because you're going to spend a lot of time in hospitals and having limbs chopped off and everything else, right? And we've now cultivated this culture in this country. We have, like celebrities like Lizzo, who's saying, I'm beautiful and I'm fat and look at my diet. And she's showing the soft drinks and Doritos and everything. And I'm sitting there going, okay, you may be beautiful and you may be very talented. I know those things to be true because she's got a gorgeous face and she could play the crap out of a flute. But the problem is that you're not healthy. You're not going to convince me that at your weight that you're healthy. And I don't want to see you die, and I don't want to see you cause anyone else to die with your nonsense of thinking that you're healthy. It's just not right.
Yeah, I think this is part of this sort of polarized society we're living in today, with these sort of extreme polarized views. And I mean, I agree, body positivity is great. I think people should feel beautiful and should feel good about themselves. There's no reason to be ashamed or sort of hide. That's not the point. But also, like you said, there is a strong correlation between excess body weight and at least excess abdominal body fat, right? And poor metabolic health, which drives all our chronic diseases. So it doesn't really help to just ignore that or pretend that problem doesn't exist. So, I mean, some people may be healthier at a higher weight than other people. These are individual things, but in general, if you have excess body fat, especially around your abdomen, then you're at increased risk of all kinds of health problems. And this is basically caused by our, in most cases, I would argue, caused by our food environment.
Yeah.
And again, these foods it's not like, this isn't about willpower, I would argue. This is another of those harmful sort of ideas that we're living with, where people say, just eat less, it's all about willpower. Well, some foods just cause you to eat much more. And if people don't really know what those foods are, then there is no way to choose better options. So it's very, very hard. You may argue that everybody knows that Dorito chips are bad, and maybe that's true. But I think that there is an idea out there that is being heavily promoted, that is all about calories, and as long as you count your calories, you can eat whatever you want. You can drink your soft drink, you can eat your Doritos, and that's just not true. I mean, those foods, they drive massive overeating, and they're very low in nutrients. You're going to have to eat more to get the nutrition that your body needs. So I think the big problem connected to what you're saying is that we have this very, very harmful food environment. And if people are not aware of what the problems are, then it's very hard to fix it.
Absolutely. And, Weight Watchers did us no good over the past 60 years since that's been around, saying that you can eat whatever you want. And here's some points. We'll assign a point to everything. And if you want to save up all of your points all day long and eat 5 brownies right before you go to bed, then there you have it. And I don't feel like that's teaching anyone anything,
No, I think all these restrictive ideas of counting your calories, counting your points, you could argue counting your carbs is also potentially problematic, but at least it drives people to higher satiety foods on average. So at least it's a big improvement, I think. You could also argue about this intermittent fasting thing. You can only eat during these hours, etc. Yeah, it tends to work to some extent for a lot of people, but perhaps mostly because as you say, you do 16-8, you avoid your nighttime snacking, you avoid your breakfast that might not be the greatest one. Often it's very high carb.
Yeah.
So you end up with some real foods, hopefully, for lunch and dinner. I think it's much more important to focus on the quality of the food that you do eat, because that's going to determine how much you want to eat.
Yeah, look, the whole intermittent fasting and OMAD and all of that, man, that's another hour. You and I could do an hour on that.
Yeah, at least.
one of the problems, people go, do you agree with it? And it's like, well, the problem is that you can't serve every king, right? If you're doing one thing and then you want to try something else, and you can start messing with your metabolism. And some of these people, they start down this road and they start fasting on their own for 2 and 3 days without eating. And it's like, well, maybe you should have a doctor paying attention to what you're doing. And, I don't think it's something you should be doing on your own. I have problems with it. And a lot of people turn it into diet trickery and And
Yeah.
again, that becomes like Weight Watchers. Let's just trick ourselves into having a brownie after 3 days. So that's
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, clearly a lot of people are losing a lot of weight on intermittent fasting, and it can work. It can accelerate your progress,
sure.
perhaps. But long fasts, I'm not a big fan, because you tend to lose lean mass and muscle mass. So I would recommend sticking to shorter fasts if you're going to do it, like 16/8 or something like that. And even then, I think it's super important to eat good food when you do it, because especially if you do long fasts, and then you, like you said, you start eating brownies or whatever it is you feel like eating when you've been starving for a while, that might not be very helpful, because
Yeah.
now you lost lean mass, and if you start eating low satiety foods, processed foods, high sugar, high fat foods, then, well, now you're gaining fat. You lost your lean mass, and now you're gaining fat, and you repeat that many cycles, then it may not be great.
Yeah. And that's how you become an American, folks. You you do it enough, and you look around and go, well, what just happened? It's like, well, you did it all backwards. Andreas, hang on. I want to say goodbye to you off the air. Folks, you could go check out Andreas Eenfeldt and what he has over at dietdoctor.com. I'm a big fan, such a fan of this guy that I had him in my first two movies, Fat Documentary and Fat Documentary 2. So you go check it out. And ladies, he's easy to look at. So you might want to go check him out over there. We also have him on video today. So if you want to go check him out on my YouTube channel, he will be there. We all go shopping on Amazon. Before you go to Amazon, go to VinnieTortorich.com, click through the banner, bookmark it, use it every time. We do appreciate that. Debbie is going to knock me over the head if I don't tell you guys that you could go to VinnieTortorich.com and get the NSNG ebook. You could go there and get it. It's now a pop-up. So it pops up when you go to the site after about, I don't know, 15 or 20 seconds. You'll see it there. So go check all of that out. On behalf of dietdoctor.com, Dr. Andreas Eenfeldt, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living and do it with enthusiasm.